Welcome to Construction Genius. This is Eric Anderton. My guest on today's show is Roger Leasure, the CEO and president of Northern California Tile and Stone and Capital City Stucco. Roger is one of my favorite people. I call him the Rainmaker. He has really done a terrific job over the years building businesses. And the reason I call him the Rainmaker is because I view him as an expert in business development. And so on this episode today, you're going to be able to tap into the wisdom of Roger and his expertise in terms of developing business as a construction contractor. I think you'll find this interview very practical. We give some specific tips for how you can get out of yourself and look at things from other people's perspective and think about winning work in terms of what your clients want, not just what you want. And I think it's very important to lay hold of that perspective. So enjoy this interview today with Roger. And if you like this interview, share it with other people. Feel free to give us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating. And thank you for listening to Construction Genius. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Roger, welcome to the show. So great to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
I tell you, man, when I think of you, I think of the word Rainmaker.
That's what my attorneys call me.
I know, man.
I don't know if I'm making rain for myself or making rain for them.
Yeah, they're probably pretty happy with the work that you've done over the years. Hey, tell me about the time when you turned a $15 investment into a $12.8 million construction project.
It was just after the recession had ended, and so I was working out of the state, chasing jobs throughout the country.
When was this time frame here?
Late 2012.
Okay.
So I was actually out on my knees doing demolition and tile setting, and a guy that was in charge of a large project. It wasn't large for me by any means, but he was a guy that was pretty high up, and we started talking about running. And both of us had a love for running. And I had mentioned a book I had just finished called Once a Runner. It's like this cult hit book. And I'm like, oh, man, have you read that book? And he says, no, I've never even heard of it. I said, oh, man, you have to read that book. So I ended up just going out and buying the book for him, I think, when Christmas came, and sending it to him. Right. And that must have really, hit home with him. Like, here's a guy I barely know, and he sent me a Christmas present. It wasn't like going out and buying, you go out and buy 100 bottles of wine and everybody just gets a bottle of wine.
Yeah,
and
right.
You buy 100 boxes of chocolates, everybody gets a box of chocolates. Whether you drink wine or whether you eat candy, you're getting that gift. And so it was personalized. It was a personal touch.
Right on. And this guy was a project manager for...
Westfield Developments. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a big mall developer.
Yeah. And then 8 years later, I'm chasing a big job, a big job, and for me anyways. And that guy ended up being the head of that job, and it allowed me to work my way in, because he's like, hey, Roger, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, hey, how's it going? And so, yeah, it was successful.
That's awesome.
Putting in that little touch, a cheap book.
See, it's interesting because you tell that story. I know that I've used that same strategy, where I have a client, and the president of the organization, he loves baseball.
Yeah.
And I really like baseball as well. And I was reading this book called The Mental Game of Baseball. I sent him the book, and I liked it a lot myself. I didn't know that he was a baseball player, but he played in college and all that kind of stuff. And I remember the first time I met with him in the office, his office, that book was there on the table. And so that same kind of influence, I think, took place as a result of me personalizing that marketing or that sales effort.
Yeah, there's some people that have that gift. I don't have that gift. Like in our family, we always talk about my wife's brother, my kid's Uncle Roland, and he's the best gift giver every single year for 20 years. he knows somehow exactly what everybody wants. Like he spends the whole year listening to what you're saying. And when Christmas comes, his gift is always the best.
That's interesting.
Yeah, every time.
But you got to keep your ears open when you're doing business development and take interest in other people.
Yeah, and take notes. I take pretty detailed notes and try to keep a file. So if I'm getting ready to go to a basketball game with a client, I look and I realize in 2014 he had 2 girls that were 16 and 14 playing volleyball. Well, now it's 2020. Hey, how are your girls? Did they graduate from the oldest one should be graduating from school? How was her volleyball career, et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, holy shit, this guy's pays attention to me when I'm talking.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So what do you think the fundamental principle underlying all of that activity is that you try and sort of practice?
Well, for me, it ties into two books. One would be the Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And that book may seem a little antiquated, but I think personally that book is still every bit as valuable today as it was when it was written. And the other one would be a book, I'm pretty sure it's a Stephen Covey book, and he mentions being on a subway heading home, and this guy's sitting there kind of zoned out, and his 3 kids are running all over the place and wreaking havoc. At least this is the way I remember reading it.
Yep.
And he says, hey, do you always let your kids run around and be so obnoxious? And the guy's like, oh man, I'm sorry. We just came from the hospital. Their mom just died and I'm in shock and I really don't know how to handle them. And the author of the book saying, you never know what other people are going through, or you don't know what other people are thinking. So you need to be able to change your paradigm.
Yeah.
So that's changing your paradigm in a different perspective, where if somebody's tailgating you, hey, maybe they're trying to get to the hospital, maybe their wife's having a baby, but changing your paradigm as far as the Dale Carnegie book, that book taught me that 99% of the people are thinking about what they want and what they have to do 99% of the time.
Right.
So what I try to teach my upper management is you can't get a hold of a general contractor, or you can't get a hold of a developer and say, hey, I want to do your $5 million tile job.
Right.
Because there's 10 other guys out there that want to do their $5 million tile job. What does that GC want? What does that developer want? And that helps us boil down as a team. Hey, they want help with budgets.
Right.
In the design phase.
Yep.
They want help with 50% DDs, 75% DDs.
What's a DD?
Design drawings.
Thank you.
Right?
Yep.
So, I mean, that's just one aspect of it.
So it sounds like what you're doing is you're trying to get out of your own head and put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're wanting to do work with.
And it sounds easier than it is.
Yeah.
It's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
To think about what other people want instead of thinking about what you want, because you want that big job.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's interesting. A couple of things. I think about this idea of the sort of the law of reciprocation, where going back to the first guy where you sent him a $15 book. Mm-hmm. And you didn't ask anything in return, but what you did is you established that you were willing to give to him, and that established a level of trust and liking, so to speak, that when the opportunity came up, it's interesting to think about how that $15 really had that impact on the $12.8 million deal.
Right.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Why do you think people struggle with this idea, especially when it comes to business development? Because people really struggle to put themselves in other people's shoes. Why do you think that is?
I just think it's inherent for us as humans, really, I mean, to boil it down, we're animals.
Right.
You're constantly thinking about what you need to do, what you need to achieve, what you're doing this weekend, your workload, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard to think about somebody else's workload.
Right.
If I have 55 hours worth of work to get done in a week, how do I change my paradigm to think about a project manager or an estimator that works for somebody else and their 60 hours worth of work, and how can I help them get their 60 hours worth of work done easier?
Yeah. It seems that there's this idea here of being more interested in other people than you are in yourself.
Yeah, there's a lot of books on it, like the psychology of influence. It'll break down 10 different ways they can get people to do stuff that you couldn't do before. And I'll give you a quick example. They said they asked, say, 1,000 random people if they would work in this homeless shelter 2 hours every month for 3 years.
Right.
And then they asked them, after so many people said no, then they said, well, would you work in this homeless shelter for 2 hours? Well, after the big, huge ask, then more people committed to the smaller ask and more people showed up. Now, if you just ask for the smaller ask first,
right?
Hey, will you work in this homeless shelter for 2 hours? 90% of the people say, no, I don't have time.
So let me ask you then. Okay, so that is a principle of influence where you start with the big ask, but you really have an idea of the smaller ask.
Right.
So how do you, as the leader of your organization, how do you work with people who are people who work for you, who are maybe technically minded, they like building projects, or they like estimating, and they like sitting behind their screens and cranking out numbers, and they're really good at it. How do you work with them, helping them to get this business development mindset?
So we implemented a core client list, and we do strategic planning annually. And then we implemented a core client list because we didn't really want to. We want to work for select clients, probably like all the general contractors out here. You want to work for clients that are safe, organized, have their act together, treat you fairly. It needs to be a symbiotic relationship. So we developed that, and then we went further and developed a business development strategy where all the project managers and estimators have to report to our general manager on a weekly basis their business development work of the previous week.
Okay.
And we've invested in it, so we have really good season tickets to the Kings.
Right, Sacramento Kings.
Yeah, and I don't just take the games and take my kids and my wife, or take my high school buddies.
Or take me.
Yeah. Yeah. So the estimators are required to go out and, on company money.
Yep.
Right? Go have cocktails, go have dinner, spend time at a Kings game. You could have a worse job than working here.
Right.
But spending time with the clients and doing stuff, and we hold them accountable for that. Like, I can't go to 42 Kings home games a year. I only have so much time.
So there's a couple of keys there. Number one is that you've got that targeted list, and that's extremely important to develop. Number two, you've got that accountability piece where your general manager is holding your PMs and your estimators, who are kind of responsible for business development, accountable for their activity. Right. And then you've got this idea of the unique sort of time spent together, like going to the Kings game. Again, that's a sweet stadium. It's a really nice time to spend together, thinking, what is it that the other person would like to do? How would they like to spend time getting to know you? Right. That's really interesting. But it's interesting how that, I find that some construction companies, what they miss two aspects of that. They miss the targeted aspect. They don't really do a lot of thinking around right client, right job type, right location. And then the other part that they miss a lot of times is the accountability. Yeah, there's different ways you can run your business. You can just be a hard bid. Yep. And there's plenty of people that are just hard bid. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to bid everything that comes across the desk. I'm going to sign up for the Builders Exchange, and it's going to be sheer volume. I'm going to bid $150 million a year in tile and stone, or $150 million a year in lath and plaster. And I'm going to get 20% of that, and I'm going to do $30 million. Right. But for us, then you're dealing with the unknown, and it's more competitive. You're dealing with general contractors that may not be so safe, may not be so organized, may not reciprocate in the future with future work. And some of those general contractors may also have that same
like I could name names, certain contractors, they're just hard bid contractors. Whereas we prefer to be service oriented, helping you guys out. Hey, bring us a huge 1,000-room hotel remodel.
Right.
When you have a couple things scratched out practically on a napkin, you've got 30% design drawings. Don't budget it yourself.
Right.
We'll budget it for you. We'll say, hey, we can do all these quartz tops for this much, or if you want granite, we can do them for this much.
And are you typically charging for the budgeting process?
No.
Okay, so that's upfront, huh?
Yeah. So it's upfront work. But then, so our client list is, I wouldn't say always evolving. We have a lot of the same core clients we've had forever.
Right.
But we do have to be able to change our client list. Like there's a certain client in town that we spent years budgeting $10 million worth of work, 4 or 5 separate jobs. And then every time it came to construction drawings and, hey, we need a price, it was like, well, you're not low bid.
Right.
And they didn't give us last look, or they didn't give us, well, you're 3% high, you're getting the job anyways. It was like, use our estimating department, use our budgeting, use our stuff. And then in the end, oh, you're not getting any of the work.
So that's where you got to be smart about that, right? You've got to work with people who are not just takers. They're not just using you, right? You're not just, standing out on the corner offering out estimating services for free.
Right. Yeah. So that list is, recently we pulled a large general contractor off that list.
Right.
And we replaced them with a different general contractor that seems to have more of a relationship vibe.
Right.
Yeah.
What have you found is the advantage in terms of building those long-term relationships with clients? How does that affect your business development activities and your ability to win work?
Well, the long-term advantage is you get to know those people on a personal basis no matter where they go. So you may have a company that's doing $500 million a year, and you've got a great relationship with, say, 3 or 4 people in that office. You've been going to games together. You know a little bit about their family. They know a little bit about your family. And then somebody decides to make a change. One of those people say, hey, look, I'm going over here because I wasn't cut in on the ownership piece. In fact, that recently happened to me. Somebody left and said, well, I'm going over to this other company. We need to have lunch together. So I grabbed up my general manager. We went, sat down and had lunch, and they said, look, I'm moving on to this other business. I want you to start working for this new company.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now I'm plugged in with a company that's doing $100 million a year. And this guy wants me to do the tile and stone and the lath and plaster for him. It's a brand new client.
Yep. So what do you do when you're working with your guys, and let's say you're working with someone who's involved in estimating? They're technically really strong. They know how to do a really good takeoff. They know how to estimate a project in such a way that you're able to win it, but they're not necessarily so strong on the relationship side. What are some of the ways that you encourage them to get out of themselves and get into that sphere where they may be uncomfortable building relationships one-on-one with people?
Well, I will go with them. So I will attend the games with them, or we will have a meet and greet in an office. And instead of me just saying, hey, I want to introduce myself to your estimating department, or I want to come in and talk to you guys, we'll set something up and we'll say, hey, we're going to bring in Starbucks and donuts and bagels Tuesday at 8:30 after your estimating meeting.
Right.
We'll say that to a big general contractor, and then 8 of us will go in, or 10 of us will go in, and we'll stand around and everybody will BS. And so the 6 or 7 extroverts can do their stuff, but the 2 or 3 introverts are in there, and they've got somebody, they feel more comfortable, and they can play off and kind of sit back, but still. And then usually the general contractor or developer will point out, oh yeah, that guy right there, I really appreciate, he spent a year budgeting this job, and that's why I gave him the job. And so yeah, I mean, we plan stuff. We're not, one of the things I learned, I didn't learn it young enough, I don't think anybody ever does, but I have a friend that got tied into a guy who was worth several $100 million.
Right.
And this guy that was worth several $100 million, it's a funny story. My friend pulled over, some guy was broke down. And he says, "Hey, you need a ride?" And the guy goes, "Yeah, I'm going to the airport. I'm late. And my car's broke down." And so my friend gives this guy a ride to the airport and says, "Hey, you can just have my car. I'll call a cab." This is before Uber, right?
Right.
"I'll call a cab. You can have my car and just return it to me later."
Right.
Because the guy was in a suit and everything else. Well, that guy turned out to be worth a couple $100 million.
Right.
So that guy helped him start a business. He became really successful. But my friend said he learned from that guy is you need to sell every day. Sell, sell, sell. You're selling every day. And when I first heard that, I thought, I'm just a contractor. What are you talking about? Like, I'm not a salesman.
Right. So how do you make that shift then from being I'm just a contractor to that realization that I am in sales every day? What did you do when did that sort of strike you?
Well, once I set my business up to where there were no jobs left, like one of the books I read a long time ago, I can't remember the name of it, but the concept was, hey, this lady likes baking pies, so she's going to open a pie shop.
Yeah.
Pretty soon she's burnt out because she's a waitress and she's bussing tables and she's doing the dishes and she's working from 5 a.m. till 9 o'clock at night, and she doesn't even hardly have time to bake pies, right?
Right.
So the point of the book, at least the way I got it, I probably read it 25 years ago, was hire somebody to do the dishes, hire somebody to mop the floors, hire somebody to be the waitress, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I did till you're just down to pie baking.
Right.
So for me, I immediately started hiring people to do all the jobs I didn't want to do, and ended up with where my job was to like go to fights and ball games and spend time with clients, and I'm a people person too, so that helped.
So how do you handle? So here's something that a lot of people listening might have a challenge with, particularly in terms of sales. How do you handle the rejection part of it, right? So you go to a GC and you knock on their door, you say, "Hey, what's up? I'd love to do some work with you," and the guy kind of blows you off or something like that, and you how do you handle that?
I mean, the sun's going to go into a nova and the world's going to burn to a crisp. So, I mean, nothing's really a big deal.
Right.
I mean, that's not a big deal.
So a little bit of rejection never really hurt anyone, huh?
And no, it shouldn't.
Yeah.
But back to your question as far as training your estimators too. One thing I always try to tell my sales department and my guys is estimating is 50% art, 50% science.
Okay.
So it's easy to get a set of plans, data in Excel. It's X amount of money. Boom, you spit out a number. There's your number. Well, that's only 50% of the equation. There has to be an art to that. You can't just turn that number in, or you can't just turn that number in and then let it sit there and expect a phone call.
Right.
I think you need to follow up. You need to see if there's anything you can do. You call them and ask them, "Hey, is this project over budget? I've got some value engineering ideas," or even with your proposal, "Here's the project per plans and specs. It's $2.1 million.
Right.
However, you have these materials that go underneath the tile and stone specified, and I can give you the same warranty with this product for $1.9 million. Or you have this type of, you have a 3-coat system. This 3-coat system's $2 million. We can give you a 1-coat system for 1.8, and give them that value. Give them some value. Don't just do your job lazily.
So that's something that for some people, that's something that you have to really emphasize, though, because they think their job is just cranking the number out, and they feel good doing that, but they're uncomfortable with the art part of persistently following up, pleasantly following up, asking what else needs to be done, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think if you just, again, if I could hammer something home, it's to change your paradigm and find out what your client wants. So there's there was a story I heard about Trump without getting political.
Uh-oh, we're not going to get political here.
Yeah, I know.
All right, you got to listen carefully, guys, to the Donald Trump story here. Go ahead.
So in one of his books, he said he was going bankrupt. I read the book a long time ago, and he
many
said,
times, right?
Yeah, he was going bankrupt, or it was in the real estate slump in the 90s, and he didn't want to go out, and it was cold and it was rainy and this and that. And he goes out and has dinner, and he ends up getting introduced to this banker, and this banker refinances a big tranche of properties he has, and it saves him from bankruptcy or something. That's the way I remember it.
Right.
And so I always think about when I'm supposed to be somewhere or I need to do something. Hey, we have this business development lunch, or recently the fastest growing company in Sacramento lunch. You need to go to it. And it's like, man, I really don't want to go to that. But who am I going to meet when I go to it?
That's right.
And recently there was an event like that I really didn't want to go to. And I ran into a business owner whom I've known for a while. But we've been doing a lot of work in the Bay Area.
Right.
There's a lot of money in the Bay Area.
Yep.
And we recently started doing work back in
Sacramento.
Yep. And I ran into this guy, and we started talking, and he's doing a couple $100 million a year. And instead of going, hey, I want to do your lath and plaster, hey, I want to do your tile and stone, I thought, you know what? I just met a developer that has like 20 projects going.
Right.
So I emailed him and said, hey, I want to introduce you to this developer. He's got a bunch of multifamily going, and he's got a bunch of other projects in the pipeline. This guy's really building a ton of stuff.
Right.
And all of a sudden, we just started getting almost all their work.
So in other words, you were coming from the perspective of not what I can get from you, but how can I help you in your business by introducing the contractor to the developer?
Yeah, because the contractor already has a ton of subs that want to do his work.
Right.
But that contractor is trying to grow his business.
Yep.
So if I can help him grow his business,
right,
it'll help. I curry favor with him because I'm not just pestering him.
See, and that's fundamental, is putting your client's interests, whoever your client is, whether you're a sub with GCs or you're a GC with developers, you put their interests at the center of your perspective, and that changes the way you behave towards them.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting to me is the idea, just going back to your idea of the networking, because I'm like you, whenever I have something on my calendar that I know I should go to because it's the right place to go meet my clients, like, I don't want to go, I want to stay home or something like that. But what's important is for our listeners here is that you need to figure out where your clients are and make sure that you get your face in the place with them and build relationships with them. Don't waste your time hanging out in networking groups where your clients aren't.
Yeah.
Make sure you understand where they are and then spend time in those places.
Oh yeah, that's huge. There's a get together in Phoenix every year called ICSC.
Yeah.
And it's an international shopping center conference or something like that.
Right.
And I fly out to Phoenix every year and spend a week out there. And recently I took a young kid. He's 35, but I call him a young kid.
He looks young. Yeah, I know you're talking about Richie, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, he looks young.
And he's taken he has the innate business development. Like some people are kind of just born with it, I think.
Yeah, a little bit.
Some people have to learn it, right? Mm-hmm. And you can always learn more. You can always do better.
Yep.
But he has that piece. And so I've started flying him with me to certain events, and we go to this ICSC event. And sure enough, the first night we take a client out who we hadn't been doing any work for, and we go to this dinner there was 8 of us, and everybody's partying and drinking wine and eating good food. And within a week, we ended up with 2 $500,000 contracts.
There you go.
From that client. And then the following night, we had dinner with another client. So and we ended up with several large contracts. And then we attended a class, and there was a mall owner who was actually talking in the class. So we're standing outside and we're waiting to find out what malls this guy owns and kind of hem up this developer and get in front of this developer. And Richie and I are standing there talking, and this guy walks up to us and says, "Oh, that guy is in charge of Mace Rich or whatever."
Right.
And we're like, oh yeah, how do you know him? Oh, well, I do all his work.
Interesting.
I'm so-and-so.
Interesting.
And we're like, oh, we helped you finish a project that your tile sub failed on in Roseville. And he's like, oh, that's you guys. Oh, really? Da-da-da-da-da. Well, he goes, I've been looking for a guy in Northern California to do my work because my main mall guy is in LA.
Yep.
So it's just an example of working on your business instead of in your business. Sell, sell, sell. My buddy Dave, right?
Yep.
It's like sell, sell, sell. You have to be out there selling. If you're not selling, you're really not doing your job.
And that's another thing to look for with your business development people is the folks who are willing to go above and beyond, to go in the evenings. It doesn't necessarily have to be every evening, but to get out in the evenings and maybe to go for a few days to a conference like you're talking about where it's a target-rich environment. You know, these are the fundamental blocking and tackling sort of things that you have to do if you're going to succeed in sales and in business development.
Yeah, you definitely, even a small regional guy like me, you have to spend time on airplanes and you have to spend time going to where the heavy hitters are.
That's right.
For sure.
So as we're wrapping up here, Roger, I know we've talked quite a bit over the years about business development, and you know, I've had the privilege of working with you, helping you with some business development, strategic planning and things like that. What advice would you give to construction companies, whether subs or GCs? What are like the top 3 things that you as a Rainmaker would want to say to every GC and every sub as far as being successful in business development and sales?
I'd say whoever's in charge needs to get their time freed up so they can focus on that. I have trouble myself where I'll come into the office and there's 80 emails.
Right.
And then you just, at the end of the day, you spend your whole time, you just answered emails.
Right.
Like answering emails is not going to generate revenue.
Right.
So the number one thing would be to make sure you're hiring people to do your day-to-day stuff and you're putting an emphasis on sales. I think.
And that comes from the very top of the organization. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Yeah. It's fundamental.
And then I would say make sure you have written goals and that your team has written goals and you have measurable metrics.
Yep.
So we have measurable metrics everybody's bonused off of, and their numbers. I try to run the business like a sports organization, and I'm constantly telling the guys, hey, look, if you can't tell me how many yards you ran for, and I own an NFL team, I don't know whether I'm supposed to pay you $20 million a year or $200,000 a year.
Right.
If you don't know how many interceptions you threw or how many touchdowns you threw, I can't measure what you're worth.
Yep.
Now, if you come to me and say, hey, I scored 25 touchdowns and ran for 2,000 yards last year, well, yeah, I mean, you're worth a couple $100,000. I mean,
right.
That's so if you have those metrics, so we know exactly how much each estimator is supposed to estimate every year, what percentage they should be landing every year.
Right.
And everybody knows on a weekly basis where they are at that point in time and where they're tracking to finish the year.
Okay.
That's one thing.
And what about that whole idea that you brought up earlier about the targeting the right clients? Is that something that you found?
Yeah, that came with strategic planning, targeting the right clients and analyzing the data and finding out that we land 30% of our projects to these certain larger contractors that may be a little safer.
Right.
Their pre-qualification process may be a little harder. The average job size may be a little bit bigger.
Right.
They may be a little bit more paperwork heavy, this certain group of general contractors I'm talking about. So we find out, we land 1 in 3 jobs for those people. And for this other group, we're only landing 1.5 in 10. So the difference is landing 33% with group A, 15% with group B. Why not build a group A group and just bid $100 million a year to Group A? Right.
So target your A clients. So let me just let me just summarize that. The first thing is whoever's involved in business development, and in your mind, the top of the organization, the CEO should be focused on business development, is to make sure you're blocking out time to do those business development activities and hiring people to take the other stuff off of your plate. The second thing that you talked about was having those metrics so that you can measure how well your estimators, your business development folks are doing, however your organization is broken down, those metrics so that you can incentivize and bonus people off of their activity and their productivity.
Yes.
And then the third aspect of it was that idea of targeting those A clients and making sure that you're doing whatever you can to service them and to focus on them, because those are the types of folks that you can build projects profitably for.
Yeah.
Am I hearing that right?
Yeah. That's good. Good summary in a nutshell.
So let me, this is a question I like to ask all my guests at the end of a podcast. I didn't tell you about this question, so if you're not quite ready for it, it's cool.
Who did I vote for?
No. We wouldn't do that. We're in California. We can't say. What's your favorite place to eat? Favorite restaurant?
My favorite place to eat. Well, if I did eat it and could eat it, In-N-Out Burger.
Oh, really?
My favorite.
In-N-Out.
I don't know. For really, my favorite place to eat. One of the dinners I just mentioned, 44 Steak in Phoenix, Arizona.
Nice.
That was excellent.
44 Steak.
Yeah, 44 Steak in Phoenix, Arizona.
Do you remember what you had?
Yeah, I had a filet.
Nice. 44 Steak. Okay.
Yeah, 44 Steak. If
That's
you want
beautiful.
to spend some money, you can spend some money there.
Okay, cool. Roger, I really appreciate you coming on the show and giving us these insights. And again, I appreciate our relationship and our friendship. It's been something that I've deeply valued over the years here.
Yeah, as do I. I appreciate you having me on.
Right on.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
Hey, this is Eric Anderton. Thanks for listening to today's episode with Roger. And before you jet off here, I hope you got some nuggets that you can apply in terms of your business development efforts. He and I have done strategic business development planning over the years, as you might have gathered from our interview. And if that's something that you would like help with, if you're a construction contractor, a senior executive, and you're struggling to clarify who are the right types of clients and the right types of projects that you should be pursuing, or if your folks are struggling with their business development efforts and you'd like to upgrade that a little bit, reach out to me on my website, ericanderton.com. And there's a contact me page. You can put your details in there. I'll get back to you within 24 hours. And we can schedule some time to chat about some of the obstacles that you're facing. I'll give you a couple of ideas about how you might be able to overcome those and really be able to grow your business to where you'd like it to go. Again, I appreciate you listening to the show, and continue checking out the episodes as they come out on a weekly basis. Thanks again. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership.